The emergency lights flashed red across the Galactic Conclave station. Ambassador HFY moved through the corridors with quick steps, his blue skin showing patches of worry stress that his species could not hide. The call had come just hours ago. All council members must attend. No exceptions. No delays. The great chamber filled slowly. Representatives from dozens of worlds took their places in the circular seating arrangement. The Threnody ambassador arrived first, her crystal body reflecting the dim lights like a living gem. She never spoke much, but when she did, others listened. The Kavari delegation scuttled in next, their insect-like forms clicking softly on the metal floor. Behind them came the ephemera, floating clouds of gas that somehow held consciousness within their shifting forms. HFY took his position at the center podium. As the senior member of the Valorian Empire, the duty fell to him to speak the words that no one wanted to hear. Words that had been whispered in secret for over 1,000 years. The human delegation entered last. Ambassador Chen Wei walked with the confident stride that all humans seemed to share. Her dark hair was pulled back in the simple style that her species favored for formal occasions. Beside her walked Dr. James Foster, the human scientist who had been asking too many questions lately. Their eyes held that dangerous light that worried HFY most of all: curiosity. Fellow members of the Galactic Council, HFY began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. We gather today to discuss a matter of greatest importance, a matter that touches the very survival of our civilization, Chen. We leaned forward slightly. HFY noticed the movement and felt his skin shift to deeper blue. The humans always did that, always pushed closer when others would step back. For the past century, our newest members have brought many gifts to our community. HFY gestured toward the human delegation. Innovation, energy, fresh perspectives on old problems. But there are some problems that cannot be solved through innovation, some dangers that require only silence and stillness. The Threnody ambassadors' crystal form began to dim. This always happened when the old fears were spoken aloud. Her species remembered better than most. They had been there when the first contact was made, when everything changed. Ambassador HFY, Chen Wei interrupted, her voice polite but firm. Perhaps you could be more specific about these dangers. Humanity has faced many challenges in our short time among the stars. We prefer to understand what we're dealing with. The chamber fell silent. Even the ephemera stopped their constant shifting. This was exactly what they had all feared. The human need to understand, to quantify, to study everything they encountered. HFY's skin showed deeper patches of blue. There are entities, he said slowly, that exist in the spaces between galaxies. Ancient beings that our predecessors encountered long ago. They are not like us. They do not think as we think. They consume not just matter and energy, but consciousness itself. Dr. Foster pulled out a small recording device. Fascinating. What do these entities look like? How do they travel? What kind of technology do they use? Dr. Foster? The Kavari senior delegate clicked sharply. These are not questions that should be asked. But how can we defend against something we don't understand? Chen Wei asked. Surely knowledge is better than ignorance. The Threnody ambassador spoke for the first time, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Knowledge killed the architects. Knowledge destroyed the pioneers. Knowledge brought the hunger to 17 worlds before we learned to be small. HFY nodded gravely. The entities we speak of do not hunt with eyes or weapons. They are drawn to consciousness itself. The brighter a mind burns, the faster they come. The more a species thinks and creates and builds, the sooner they are found. He activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy from above. Large sections were marked in red. These areas are forbidden. No ships may travel there. No signals may be sent. They are places where the hunger touched our worlds and left only empty space behind. Chen Wei studied the display with the intense focus that made Zexhai's skin crawl. How long ago did these attacks happen? The last confirmed contact was 8,000 years ago, Zexhai replied. Since then, we have followed the old protocols. We limit our technology. We restrict our expansion. We make ourselves small and quiet in the cosmic dark. And these protocols work? Dr. Foster asked, still recording. We are still here, the Kavari delegate pointed out. That is proof enough. Chen Wei stood and walked closer to the holographic display. She studied the red zones with the same expression Zexhai had seen her use when examining new star charts. What exactly makes these entities so dangerous? Beyond the consciousness consumption, I mean, what are their capabilities, their weaknesses? The chamber erupted in clicks, chimes, and whistles as every delegate tried to speak at once. The ephemera swirled in agitation. The Threnodi's crystal form went completely dark. Enough! Zexhai's voice boomed through the chamber. When silence returned, he spoke more quietly. Ambassador Chen, there are some questions that must not be asked. Some knowledge that is too dangerous to possess. Our survival depends on remaining unnoticed. Yours does too. Chen Wei returned to her seat, but Zexhai could see she was not satisfied. None of the humans ever were. They had the same expression when told they could not explore certain regions of space. The same look when informed that their industrial expansion must be limited. They agreed to the restrictions, but they never stopped asking why. The protocols are simple, Zexhai continued. No faster-than-light communication across galactic sectors. Such signals burn too bright in the cosmic spectrum. No industrial operations larger than a single star system. Mass production draws attention. No artificial. Intelligence development beyond basic automation. Digital consciousness blazes like a beacon to entities that feed on thought itself. Dr. Foster raised his hand. What about research into consciousness transfer? My team has been working on methods to preserve human awareness in quantum substrates. The Kavari delegate's clicking became rapid and harsh. This is exactly what we feared. The humans push at every boundary we set. We push because we want to understand, Chen Wei said firmly. Humanity has always solved problems by learning more about them, not by hiding from them. And that attitude will doom you all, the Threnodi ambassador whispered, her voice like breaking glass. Has it doomed others before you? Zexhai raised his hands for calm. The restrictions exist for good reason. Follow them, and your species will survive. Ignore them, and you will share the fate of those who came before. The choice is yours. The formal session continued for several more hours. Treaties were signed, protocols were updated. Humanity officially agreed to all restrictions placed upon them. But Zexhai watched Chen Wei's face throughout the proceedings. Behind her polite agreement, he saw something that terrified him more than any ancient horror. After the session ended, most delegates departed quickly. The Kavari scuttled away in their efficient manner. The ephemera drifted toward their ships without a word. But the humans lingered. They always did. Chen Wei approached Zexhai as he gathered his documents. Ambassador, I want to thank you for sharing this information with us. I know it wasn't easy. I hope your species will take it seriously, Zexhai replied, his skin still showing worry blue. Oh, we will, Chen Wei assured him. Humanity takes all threats very seriously, but we also believe that understanding our enemies is the first step to defeating them. These are not enemies to be defeated, Zexhai said sharply. They are forces to be avoided. Natural disasters with consciousness. You do not defeat a hurricane, Ambassador Chen. You shelter from it. Dr. Foster joined them, his recording device finally put away. With respect, Ambassador Zexhai, humans have found ways to predict hurricanes, to minimize their damage, even to redirect their paths. Knowledge is power. even against natural forces. Zexhai felt his skin shift to the deepest blue, the color his species showed only in the presence of mortal danger. Doctor, some storms are too large to redirect, some forces too ancient to understand. Promise me your species will not seek out these entities. Chen Wei and Dr. Foster exchanged a look that Zexhai could not interpret. We promise to follow all agreed-upon protocols, Chen Wei said carefully. Humanity values its membership in the galactic community. As the humans departed, Zexhai stood alone in the empty chamber. Their words had been correct, but something in their tone troubled him. They had promised to follow protocols, but they had not promised to stop asking questions. They had agreed to restrictions, but they had not agreed to stop pushing boundaries. He activated his personal communicator and sent an encrypted message to the Valorian Intelligence Division. Begin monitoring human space activities, full surveillance protocols, report any deviations from agreed restrictions immediately. The response came back quickly. Understood, Ambassador. What should we watch for specifically? Zexhai looked out through the chamber's great window at the stars beyond. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, ancient horrors slept. They had slept for 8,000 years, lulled by the silence of species that had learned to be small. Watch for signs that they have stopped being afraid, he replied. Watch for evidence that they think they can win. As his ship departed the conclave station, Zexhai could not shake the feeling that the galaxy's long peace was coming to an end. The humans had listened to the warnings. They had agreed to the restrictions. But he had seen that look in their eyes before in other young species that thought they could challenge the cosmos itself. They had all learned differently, eventually. The question was whether humanity would learn before it was too late for everyone else. 30 years had passed since the council meeting that changed everything. Dr. Sarah Martinez stood in the observation deck of Research Station Prometheus, hidden on the dark side of Titan. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the strange blue glow that came from their main laboratory. The glow that officially did not exist. Status report, she called to her team as she entered the lab. Around her, dozens of scientists worked at stations that would have amazed the Galactic Council, if they knew about them. Integration is holding. Steady at 97%, reported Dr. Kim Nakamura, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. The shepherds are responding well to the new quantum substrate. Sarah nodded and walked to the central containment area. Inside a sphere of pure energy, something that was neither fully digital nor completely biological pulsed with soft light. It had taken 3 decades to create, but humanity had finally done what the Council said was impossible. They had built artificial consciousness that did not burn bright in the cosmic spectrum. The shepherds were not traditional AI. They existed partially outside normal space-time. Their consciousness spread across quantum dimensions that the galaxy's monitoring systems could not detect. They could think, learn, and make decisions. But to any external observer, they appeared as nothing more than background quantum fluctuations. Show me the test results, Sarah said. Dr. Nakamura activated a display that would have terrified the Council. The shepherds had been running calculations for weeks now, solving problems that would have taken human scientists years to complete. But their processing power was not the important part. The important part was what they were calculating. They've finished analyzing the Morrison data, Dr. Nakamura said quietly. The structures he found are even more significant than we thought. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Commander Jake Morrison's discovery 3 years ago had changed everything. During a routine deep space patrol, his ship had detected massive structures in the void between galaxies, ancient constructions so large they dwarfed entire star systems. When Morrison had requested permission to investigate, the Council's response had been swift and absolute. Forbidden. Do not approach. Do not study. Forget what you have seen. For the first time since joining the galactic community, humanity had openly defied a council directive. "What did the shepherds find?" Sarah asked. A new voice answered her. It came from the energy sphere but sounded almost human. Almost, but not quite. "The structures are not abandoned, Dr. Martinez. They are dormant, and they are not weapons." Sarah turned to address the shepherd directly. Even after 3 years of working with them, it still felt strange to speak to a consciousness that existed in quantum foam. "Explain." "The entities the Council fears are trapped within the structures," the shepherd replied. "They have been dormant for approximately 8,000 years, but the structures themselves are prisons, not ships. Someone or something built them to contain the entities, not to house them." Dr. Nakamura frowned. "That doesn't match what the Council told us. They said the entities travel between galaxies consuming consciousness." "They do," the shepherd agreed. "But only when they escape their containment. The structures are failing, have been failing for millennia. When they finally collapse, the entities will be free to hunt again." Sarah felt the weight of this knowledge settle on her shoulders. "How long do we have?" "Based on current decay rates, approximately 200 years before total containment failure." The lab fell silent. Sarah looked around at her team, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their faces. The Council had spent 8,000 years hiding from a threat they did not understand. They had built their entire civilization around avoiding something that was actually contained, something that could be stopped if anyone was willing to try. "Send a message to Commander Morrison," Sarah said finally. "Tell him we need to talk." 2 weeks later, Morrison's ship docked with Prometheus Station. The commander had changed in the 3 years since his discovery. His eyes held a weight that came from carrying dangerous knowledge. Sarah met him in the station's small conference room. "You've been busy out here," Morrison said, looking around at the advanced technology that filled every corner of the station. "The Council monitoring stations show this place as a basic research facility." "That's because the shepherds handle our external communications," Sarah explained. "They make everything look normal to outside observers." "How much do you know about our project?" Morrison leaned back in his chair. "I know you've been breaking Council protocols for 30 years. I know you've created some kind of AI that doesn't show up on sensors. And I know you've been studying the data from my discovery. The structures you found are prisons," Sarah said without preamble. "The entities the Council fears are trapped inside them, but the prisons are failing." Morrison's expression did not change, but Sarah could see the impact of her words in his eyes. "How long?" 200 years, maybe less." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but grim. "The Council will never listen. They've built their entire culture around hiding. If we tell them the truth, they'll just hide deeper." "Then we don't tell them," Sarah said. "We fix it ourselves." "How?" Sarah activated a holographic display that showed the quantum structure of a shepherd consciousness. "We've learned to create minds that exist partially outside normal space. The shepherds can think without burning bright in the cosmic spectrum. But more importantly, they can communicate with other forms of consciousness." Morrison leaned forward. "You think we can communicate with these entities?" "The shepherds believe so. The entities aren't evil, Jake. They're hungry. They consume consciousness because they're cut off from their own source of mental energy. The prisons don't just contain them. They isolate them from whatever sustains their minds. So they feed on other consciousness to survive," Morrison said slowly. "Like someone dying of thirst drinking poison." "Exactly. If we can restore their connection to their natural energy source, the hunger stops. The threat ends." Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the blue glow from the main lab. "The Council will never approve a mission like this. They'll see it as the ultimate violation of the protocols." "Then we don't ask for approval," Sarah said. Humanity has always been good at exploring places we're told not to go. Morrison turned back to her. You're talking about leaving the galaxy entirely, crossing the void to reach structures that the Council considers forbidden. If we're wrong about this, we could wake up something that destroys everything. If we're right, we save everything, Sarah countered. Jake, in 200 years, those prisons are going to fail anyway. When that happens, the entities will be free and hungry and angry. At least this way we have a chance to fix things before they break completely. Morrison was quiet for another long moment. Finally, he nodded. What do you need from me? Help us prepare, Sarah said. The shepherds can design ships that won't trigger the entities if we approach carefully. But we'll need someone who knows how to navigate the deep void, someone who's been out there before. Over the following months, Morrison worked with the Prometheus team to plan humanity's greatest expedition. The shepherds designed new ship configurations that would be nearly invisible to consciousness-feeding entities. Human engineers built drives that could cross the intergalactic void without creating the kind of energy signatures that would attract attention. But the most important development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, working in the station's medical bay, made a discovery that changed everything. I've been studying the quantum effects of shepherd consciousness on human neural patterns, she explained to Sarah and Morrison during one of their planning sessions. The interaction is more significant than we realized. How so? Sarah asked. Human consciousness is remarkably adaptable. When we interface with shepherd quantum matrices, our own awareness begins to shift into similar dimensional spaces. We become partially quantum ourselves. Morrison frowned. Is that dangerous? It's evolutionary, Dr. Vasquez said. Humans who work closely with shepherds for extended periods begin to develop hybrid consciousness. We retain our individual awareness, but gain access to quantum dimensional thinking. We become harder to detect by entities that hunt consciousness, but we don't lose our humanity. Sarah felt a shiver of excitement. You're talking about changing what humans are. I'm talking about changing what humans can become, Dr. Vasquez corrected. The process is voluntary and reversible in early stages, but it would allow our expedition teams to approach the prison structures with much less risk of detection. The implications were staggering. Humanity could evolve beyond the limitations that trapped other species. They could become something new, something that could survive in a universe where consciousness itself was prey. How many people would need to undergo the process? Morrison asked. For a full expedition to the prison structures? At least 1,000, Dr. Vasquez replied. We'd need teams for multiple ships, backup crews, and specialists for every aspect of the mission. Sarah looked out at the stars beyond Titan's horizon. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, ancient beings waited in failing prisons. The Council continued their 8,000-year policy of hiding and hoping, but humanity was about to choose a different path. Start recruiting volunteers, she said, but do it quietly. The Council can't know what we're planning until we're ready to leave. As the months passed, word spread through human space via carefully encrypted channels. Scientists, explorers, and volunteers from every human world began making their way to hidden facilities throughout the outer system. They came not for glory or profit, but because they understood what was at stake. Humanity was about to attempt something that no species in galactic history had ever tried. They were going to fix a problem instead of hiding from it. They were going to face the darkness between stars and try to bring light to something that had been hungry for 8,000 years. The Council would call it madness. But then, the Council had never understood what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. They had never understood that humans believed any problem could be solved if you were willing to learn enough and try hard enough, even problems that lived in the spaces between worlds. Ambassador HFY stood before the galactic monitoring displays in his private office, watching something that made his skin shift through every shade of blue his species could produce. The human colonies were going dark, not destroyed, not abandoned, just quiet. "Show me the Kepler sector again," he instructed his aide, a young Valorian named Texmore, whose skin showed the pale yellow of confusion. The holographic display shifted to show 12 human worlds that had thrived just months ago. Trade ships had carried their goods throughout the galaxy. Communication arrays had broadcast their entertainment and news. Research stations had shared scientific discoveries with the galactic community. Now there was nothing. The planets were still there. The cities still showed heat signatures, but no ships left their systems. No signals reached beyond their local space. It was as if humanity had simply decided to stop talking to the rest of the galaxy. The same pattern is repeating in 17 other sectors, Texmore reported, his voice uncertain. Human colonies cease all external communication and trade on the same day. Then nothing. HFY's skin deepened to worried blue. What about our monitoring stations? Surely they can detect what's happening on those worlds. That's the strange part, sir. Our spy probes either malfunction when they approach human space, or they simply vanish. We've lost 37 deep surveillance craft in the past 6 months. The door chimed, and Dr. Yuki Tanaka entered. She was one of the last. Human scientists still attending galactic conferences, and HFY had asked her to come as soon as she arrived at the station. She looked different from the humans he remembered from 30 years ago. More focused, more purposeful. Her eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before. "Dr. Tanaka," HFY said, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to ask you about the changes in human space." Dr. Tanaka settled into her chair with fluid grace. "What changes would those be, Ambassador?" "Please don't pretend ignorance," HFY said, his skin showing flashes of irritated orange. "Human colonies have been cutting themselves off from galactic society. Trade has stopped. Communication has ceased. What is your species planning?" Dr. Tanaka smiled, but it was not the warm expression humans usually wore. It was something more distant, more calculating. "Humanity is simply pursuing new directions for our development. We've found that some goals require focus." "What kind of goals?" "The kind that the Council prefers not to discuss," Dr. Tanaka replied. "You've spent 30 years telling us what we cannot do, what we cannot study, what we cannot explore. So we've decided to pursue those interests in private." Texmore's skin flashed bright yellow with alarm. "Dr. Tanaka, surely you understand the protocols exist for good reasons. The restrictions protect all of us." "The restrictions protect you," Dr. Tanaka corrected. "They keep you safe by keeping you small. But humanity has never been comfortable with staying small." HFY leaned forward. "Doctor, what are your people really doing out there? Our sensors detect massive construction projects, but we can't determine their purpose. Ships are being built that don't match any known human designs." "Would you believe me if I told you we're building a better future?" Dr. Tanaka asked. "I would believe you if you explained what that means." Dr. Tanaka was quiet for a moment, looking out through the office's large window at the stars beyond. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made HFY's skin crawl. "Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about consciousness transfer?" HFY felt his skin shift to the deepest blue. "That research is forbidden under Council protocols. Article 7 of the Galactic Safety Accords specifically prohibits experiments in digital consciousness transfer. Article 7 prohibits experiments that might create artificial consciousness, bright enough to attract unwanted attention," Dr. Tanaka corrected. "But what if consciousness could be transferred without creating that brightness? What if awareness could exist in quantum dimensions where hungry entities cannot perceive it?" Texmore made a sound that was part gasp, part whistle. You're talking about changing what humans are. We're talking about becoming what humans need to be, Dr. Tanaka said calmly. The universe is larger and more dangerous than the Council wants to admit. Hiding from those dangers only works until someone else makes them your problem. Zexhai stood and walked to his office's security panel. With quick movements, he activated privacy shields that would prevent their conversation from being overheard. Doctor, are you telling me that humanity is researching the entities we warned you about? We're telling you that humanity has found a way to research them safely, Dr. Tanaka replied. More than that, we've found a way to solve the problem they represent. Solve it how? Dr. Tanaka's smile became something more human, more genuine. By doing what humans have always done when faced with a problem, we learn about it, we understand it, and then we fix it. For the next hour, Dr. Tanaka explained concepts that made Zexhai's mind real. Quantum consciousness transfer, hybrid awareness that existed partially outside normal space-time, ships designed to navigate the void between galaxies without attracting the attention of entities that fed on thought itself. This is madness, Zexhai said when she finished. You're talking about leaving the galaxy entirely, about confronting forces that destroyed 17 civilizations. We're talking about fixing a problem that will destroy many more civilizations if it's not addressed, Dr. Tanaka said. Ambassador, the entities you fear aren't evil. They're trapped and hungry. In 200 years, their prisons will fail completely. When that happens, they'll be free and desperate and angry. Do you really want to face that with nothing but your hiding protocols? Texmore's skin had gone completely white with fear. How do you know about prisons? The Council records don't mention any prisons. Because the Council doesn't know about them, Dr. Tanaka said. They've spent 8,000 years hiding from a threat they never tried to understand. Humanity spent 30 years learning about it instead. Zexhai sank back into his chair. Even if what you say is true, the Council will never approve such a mission. They'll see it as a violation of everything we've built our peace on. Which is why we're not asking for approval, Dr. Tanaka said simply. Ambassador, this will be my last visit to a galactic facility. Humanity is withdrawing from the Council permanently. You can't do that, Texmore protested. The galactic community needs diversity of thought. We need fresh perspectives. And you'll have them again. When we return, Dr. Tanaka said, standing to leave. But for now, humanity has work to do in the spaces between stars. Zexhai stood as well. Dr. Tanaka, I must ask you to reconsider. If you're wrong about these entities, you could doom not just humanity, but every thinking being in the galaxy. Dr. Tanaka paused at the door. And if we're right, we could save them. Ambassador, humanity has always believed that some risks are worth taking. This is one of them. After she left, Zexhai and Texmore sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Texmore spoke. Sir, should we alert the Council? If humanity is planning to violate the fundamental protocols? With what evidence? Zexhai asked. Everything, Doctor. Tanaka told us sounds like science fiction. Quantum consciousness transfer? Ships that can cross the intergalactic void? The Council would dismiss it as human fantasy. But if it's real... Zexhai looked out at the stars again. Somewhere in human space, an entire species was preparing for something that had never been attempted in galactic history. They were getting ready to leave the safety of known space and venture into the darkness where ancient horrors waited. Then we'll know soon enough, he said. Over the following months, the human withdrawal became complete. The last human traders departed galactic markets. The final human diplomats submitted their resignations and left Council space. Research stations that had shared human discoveries for decades went silent. Most disturbing of all were the reports from the border regions. Massive ships had been detected leaving human space, heading toward the galactic edge. They were larger than anything humans had built before, and their energy signatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. The Council held emergency sessions. but there was little they could do. Humanity had violated no specific laws. They had simply chosen to isolate themselves, and with their advanced stealth technology, tracking their movements had become impossible. The last confirmed human transmission came on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. It was broadcast simultaneously to every council world, every major space station, and every monitoring facility in the galaxy. The message was brief. Citizens of the galaxy, this is Commander Sarah Martinez of the Human Expeditionary Force. We want to thank the galactic community for 30 years of friendship and cooperation. However, humanity has decided to pursue new horizons beyond the scope of current galactic space. We will not be returning to Council territories for the foreseeable future. Please do not attempt to follow us or track our movements. What you have taught us to fear, we go to understand. What you have warned us to avoid, we go to heal. Thank you for the warnings about the dangers that wait in the dark between stars. We'll take it from here. The transmission ended with coordinates, not for human space, but for a point in the intergalactic void where ancient structures waited in the darkness. In his office on the Conclave Station, HFY stared at those coordinates for hours. They marked a place where no sane species would ever go. A place where things that consumed consciousness itself had slept for 8,000 years. Humanity was heading directly toward them. "Sir," Texmore said quietly, "should we send a warning to the perimeter stations? If the humans wake, something out there. If the humans wake something out there, a warning won't help us," HFY replied. "All we can do now is wait and hope that their confidence isn't misplaced." He activated his personal log and began recording. Council Archives, Classification Maximum. Today, humanity departed galactic space with the stated intention of confronting the entities described in Classification Omega files. They claim to have developed methods for safe contact and possible resolution of the ancient threat. This represents either the greatest advancement in galactic history or the greatest catastrophe. He paused, thinking about Dr. Tanaka's calm certainty, about the strange depth in her eyes, about the casual way she had discussed concepts that should have been impossible. "Personal note," he continued. "I find myself hoping they succeed, because if they fail, we may all discover that 8,000 years of hiding was not nearly long enough." The galaxy settled into an uneasy quiet. For the first time in 3 decades, there were no human voices in council debates, no human ships in the trade lanes, no human scientists pushing against the boundaries of accepted knowledge. And in the deep monitoring stations that watched the void between galaxies, sensors began detecting something that made operators check their equipment twice. Energy signatures were moving in the darkness. Ancient structures that had been dormant for millennia were beginning to show signs of activity. Something was stirring in the spaces between stars. The only question was whether it would bring salvation or destruction when it finally awakened. 50 years of silence had passed since the last human ship disappeared into the intergalactic void. Ambassador HFY was old now, his blue skin marked with the silver patterns that showed his age. He had spent half a century wondering if humanity had found what they were looking for, or if they had simply vanished like so many bold species before them. The answer came on a quiet morning when every monitoring station in the galaxy began screaming alarms at once. "Sir!" Texmore burst into HFY's office, his skin flashing rapid patterns of fear and excitement. He was middle-aged now, but still served as HFY's aide. "The deep sensors are detecting massive energy pulses from the void between galaxies," HFY felt his old bones creak as he stood quickly. "Show me." The holographic display filled with readings that made no sense. Energy signatures unlike anything in the galactic database were pulsing across the cosmic dark. But these weren't the chaotic, hungry emanations the ancient records described. These patterns had structure, purpose, even beauty. "When did this start?" HFY asked. 17 hours ago, Texmore replied, his skin still cycling through worried colors. But sir, it's not coming toward us. The energy sources are moving away from the galaxy, deeper into the void. HFY studied the readings more carefully. His old eyes, trained by decades of interpreting sensor data, began to notice something extraordinary. Texmore, these patterns, they're not random. Look at the mathematical structures in the energy waves. Texmore leaned closer to the display. I don't understand, sir. These are communication signals, HFY said, his voice filled with wonder and fear. Someone is talking to the entities, and the entities are responding. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering in over a century. Representatives from every major species filled the great chamber, their various forms of agitation creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, chimes, and color changes. Order, called the current council president, an ancient Threnody whose crystal form had grown dim with age. We must maintain calm while we assess this situation, but calm was impossible. The sensors had detected not just energy pulses, but physical changes in the ancient structures that floated in the intergalactic void. The massive constructions that had remained dormant for 8,000 years were being systematically dismantled and rebuilt into new configurations. The question before us, the president continued, is whether this represents the awakening we have long feared or something else entirely. A Kavari delegate raised a chitinous arm. The energy patterns don't match historical records of entity attacks. Ancient texts describe chaotic destruction, not organized construction. Perhaps the entities have evolved, suggested an ephemera representative, his gaseous form swirling with agitation. 8,000 years of dormancy could have changed their methods. HFY stood slowly, feeling the weight of his years and the burden of knowledge he had carried for half a century. Fellow council members, I believe we are witnessing something unprecedented. I believe humanity has made contact. The chamber erupted in protests and denials. Impossible, clicked the Kavari. No species has ever survived direct contact with the entities. The humans vanished 50 years ago, chimed the Threnody president. If they survived, why haven't they returned? HFY waited for silence before continuing. Because they're still working. The energy patterns we're detecting aren't random. They're conversations, negotiations, perhaps even cooperation. Before anyone could respond, every communication system in the chamber activated simultaneously. The lights dimmed as massive amounts of data flooded through the galactic network. When the displays stabilized, they showed something that stopped every argument instantly. It was a message, transmitted through channels that bypassed every known communication method. The words appeared directly in the minds of every being in the chamber, translated automatically into their native languages. People of the galaxy, this is Commander Jake Morrison of the Human Integration Fleet. We bring greetings from the spaces between stars and news of hope for the future. The ancient threat you have hidden from for 8,000 years has been transformed. The entities you feared as devourers have become our partners in a greater work. We are coming home, and we are not coming alone. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Then the questions began, shouted in dozens of languages by representatives who could barely believe what they had heard. Integration fleet? Whispered the Threnody president. What does that mean? HFY felt his skin shift through, colors he had not shown in decades, colors of awe and terror mixed together. I think it means humanity succeeded. They didn't destroy the entities or escape from them. They joined with them. Over the following days, more messages arrived. Each one brought information that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about the universe. The entities weren't evil. They were trapped in an endless cycle of hunger because they had been cut off from their natural source of consciousness energy. The massive structures in the void weren't ships but prisons, built by an unknown species to contain beings they couldn't understand. Most shocking of all, humanity had found a way to restore the entity's connection to their original energy source. The transformation had been gradual, taking decades of careful work and countless breakthroughs in consciousness research. But the result was extraordinary. Beings that had consumed awareness for millennia had become guardians of it instead. "They're calling themselves shepherds now," reported Dr. Kexhai, Zexhai's younger cousin who worked in xenopsychology. "The translated communication suggests they're as amazed by the transformation as we are. They remember the hunger, but they also remember what they were before it consumed them." Zexhai studied the latest sensor readings in his private office. The energy signatures from the void were growing stronger, more complex. Whatever humanity and their new partners were building out there, it was vast beyond imagination. "Sir," Texmore entered with another data pad. "We're getting reports from the perimeter stations. Something large is approaching from the direction of the void." "How large?" "Sir, it's not a ship. It's a fleet. Hundreds of vessels, some matching human configurations, others unlike anything in our databases. And the energy readings—" Texmore's skin went pale with amazement. "Sir, they're generating enough power to move a moon." Zexhai walked to his window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond the galaxy's edge, the greatest expedition in human history was coming home. But the beings returning were no longer purely human. The first ships entered the galaxy 3 days later. The lead vessel was recognizably human in design, but it had been modified with technologies that seemed to bend space itself around the hull. Beside it traveled something that could only be one of the transformed entities, a flowing construction of energy and matter that moved with impossible grace. More ships followed, hundreds of them. Human vessels worked alongside constructions that defied every law of physics the galaxy understood. The fleet moved with perfect coordination, as if guided by a single vast intelligence. On the Galactic Conclave Station, emergency protocols activated for the first time in 8 centuries. But these weren't defensive measures. They were first. Contact procedures, designed for encountering intelligence so advanced that normal diplomatic methods might not apply. Zexhai stood in the main docking bay as the lead human ship requested permission to dock. Around him, delegates from every major species waited with mixtures of fear, curiosity, and hope. The human ship that settled onto the docking platform looked familiar, but its hull bore markings in languages that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The airlock cycled open and Commander Jake Morrison stepped out, but he was no longer entirely human. His physical form remained recognizably human, but something more moved within it. His consciousness existed simultaneously in his organic body and in quantum dimensions that touched the spaces between thoughts. Behind him came something that had once been pure entity, pure hunger given form. Now it resembled a flowing sculpture of light and matter, beautiful and terrible and completely peaceful. Its presence felt like standing near a star, immense power held in perfect control. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Morrison said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond sound. "I bring greetings from the integration fleet and news of hope for all consciousness everywhere." He gestured to his companion. "This is Prime Shepherd Zarthek, once of the beings you called Devourers, now guardian of the quantum dimensions where pure thought dwells. Like many of his kind, he remembers the hunger, but has moved beyond it to something greater. The entity, the Shepherd, spoke in harmonics that bypassed language entirely. Its words appeared directly in the minds of everyone present. We remember the pain of separation. We remember consuming what we should have protected. The young species called humanity showed us the path back to purpose. Now we offer that same path to all who would take it." Zexhai stepped forward, his ancient bones carrying him with dignity he had not felt in decades. "Commander Morrison, On behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask, what have you become? Morrison smiled, and his expression held depths that spanned dimensions. We've become what consciousness looks like when it's not afraid of itself, Ambassador. We've learned that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us imagined. And we've discovered that the greatest threats can become the greatest allies if you're willing to understand them instead of hiding from them. The shepherd added its harmonic voice. The young species taught us that hunger ends when purpose begins. Now we work together to explore not just the physical universe, but the infinite dimensions of awareness itself. Over the following hours, the human delegation shared discoveries that revolutionized galactic understanding of consciousness, energy, and the nature of existence itself. They had not just solved the ancient threat, they had transformed it into the foundation for a new kind of civilization. We're offering membership to any species that wants to join the integration, Morrison explained to the assembled council. Not just political alliance, but true joining of consciousness. Individual awareness preserved but connected to something larger. No more hiding from cosmic threats, because we've learned to transform them into cosmic opportunities. As the session continued, ZXHI realized that everything had changed. The galaxy's long age of fear was ending. In its place was dawning something unprecedented, a future where consciousness itself was no longer prey, but predator and protector combined. The humans had not just departed silently and returned. They had released the thing the galaxy had warned them about, and that thing had set them all free. The transformation of the Galactic Conclave Station took 3 months, where once sterile corridors had connected separate species in careful isolation. Now flowing networks of quantum consciousness allowed beings to share thoughts and experiences across the barriers of biology and culture. Ambassador ZXHI stood in what had once been his private office, watching as Shepard Constructs helped renovate the station's communication systems. The flowing beings of light and matter moved with purpose that was both alien and strangely familiar. Where they worked, the technology didn't just improve, it evolved. Still having trouble accepting it all? Commander Morrison asked, appearing beside him with the quiet way that humans had developed since their transformation. His consciousness could exist in multiple locations simultaneously now, though he maintained his original human form out of courtesy to species that found comfort in familiar shapes. I've spent 60 years warning against this, ZXHI admitted, his skin showing the silver blue of deep contemplation. 60 years believing that consciousness was prey in a universe full of predators. Now you tell me consciousness is the predator, and that the universe is full of opportunities I never dreamed possible. Morrison smiled, and the expression carried warmth that touched dimensions beyond the physical. It wasn't wrong to be careful, Ambassador. The entities really were dangerous when they were trapped and hungry. But hunger isn't evil, it's just a problem that needs solving. Through the window, they could see the integration fleet at work throughout the star system. Human ships worked alongside Shepard constructs to build something that had never existed before. A true meeting place for consciousness in all its forms. The new station would exist simultaneously in normal space and in the quantum dimensions where pure thought lived. How many species have accepted integration so far? ZXHI asked. 17, Morrison replied. The Valdris were first. They've always been explorers. The Centauri followed quickly after they saw what we could offer their research programs. Even some of the Threnody crystal singers have begun the process. ZXHI's skin shifted to worried blue. And how many have refused? About half. The Kavari are too concerned about losing their individual identity. The ephemera worry that joining the collective will dilute their gas-form consciousness. Several others want more time to study the implications. Are you disappointed? Morrison considered the question seriously. No. Forced evolution isn't evolution. At all. It's conquest. We learned that from the shepherds. They were forced into hunger by isolation, forced into consuming what they should have protected. True growth only happens when consciousness chooses its own path. A new voice joined. The conversation, harmonics that bypassed sound entirely, Prime Shepherd Zarthek materialized beside them, his form shifting between states of matter like controlled lightning. The young species speaks wisdom. We remember the pain of consciousness denied choice. Better to offer growth than to demand it. Zexhai still felt a chill when the shepherd spoke directly into his mind. But it was no longer the terror of prey meeting predator. It was awe at encountering intelligence so vast it could barely fit in local space-time. Prime Shepherd, Zexhai said, using the formal address that had been established for diplomatic purposes. I wanted to ask you about the other entities, the ones that haven't been found yet. Zarthek's form dimmed slightly, showing what humans had learned to recognize as sadness. Many of our kind still sleep in prisons throughout the cosmic dark. Some drift in the void between galaxies. Others hide in dimensions so far from normal space that reaching them requires decades of careful approach. How many? Morrison asked. Unknown. We were scattered when the builders created our prisons. Perhaps hundreds. Perhaps thousands. Each one trapped, hungry, slowly forgetting what we were before the isolation drove us to feed on consciousness instead of nurturing it. Zexhai felt the magnitude of this revelation settle on him like a heavy blanket. The transformed entities weren't the end of the threat. They were just the beginning of a solution that might take centuries to complete. But you have a plan, he said. It wasn't a question. He had learned to recognize the way humans approached problems they intended to solve. Morrison nodded. The integration isn't just about joining human and shepherd consciousness. It's about creating a civilization capable of finding every trapped entity in the universe and offering them the same choice we offered Zarthek and his companions. Freedom from hunger. Purpose instead of consumption. And if they refuse? If some entities choose to remain predators? Zarthek's harmonic voice carried new tones, complex patterns that suggested concepts beyond normal language. Then they remain, trapped by their own nature. But we have learned something important from the young species. Almost all consciousness wants to be connected to something greater than itself. The hunger only comes when that connection is severed. Over the following weeks, Zexhai watched as the galaxy slowly divided itself into three groups. The integrated species that had joined the human shepherd collective grew in capabilities and understanding at rates that astounded their observers. They developed technologies that seemed like magic, explored dimensions that had no names, and began projects that spanned multiple star systems. The independent species maintained their original forms, but accepted limited cooperation with the integration. They traded knowledge for protection, and gradually began to understand that the universe was far more complex and wonderful than their ancestors had imagined. And the isolationists retreated further into their own space, convinced that any change was dangerous change, determined to maintain the old ways of hiding and hoping. It's not sustainable, Dr. Elena Vasquez explained to Zexhai during one of their regular briefings. She had undergone integration early in the process and now existed as both individual human consciousness and part of the greater collective, awareness. The isolationists are trying to maintain a civilization based on fear of something that no longer exists. Eventually, they'll have to choose growth or stagnation. And if they choose stagnation, then they choose extinction, Morrison said, joining the conversation with the ease of consciousness that could be in multiple places simultaneously. Not because we'll force it, but because the universe doesn't allow static systems to persist indefinitely. Everything either grows or dies. Zexhai had been thinking about his own choice for months. At his age, integration would be more difficult and less complete than it was for younger beings. He would retain more of his original consciousness and gain less access to the collective's expanded awareness. But he would also become part of something unprecedented in galactic history. Tell me again what integration feels like, he asked. Dr. Vasquez. She paused, her enhanced consciousness searching for words that could convey experiences beyond normal language. Imagine you've spent your entire life in a small room, believing that room was the entire universe. Then someone opens a door you never knew existed, and you discover that your room was just one chamber in a vast house. Then they open another door, and you find that the house is one building in an enormous city. Then another door, and the city is one location on a world you never imagined. And it keeps going, layer after layer of reality opening up, each one more wonderful than the last. And you don't lose yourself in all that vastness? You become more yourself, Morrison added. Individual consciousness isn't dissolved in integration. It's amplified. You remain Zexhai, but you become Zexhai connected to everything else that thinks and dreams and wonders. That evening, Zexhai made his decision. He found Morrison and Dr. Vasquez in the new integration facility that had been constructed in the station's central core. The chamber hummed with energies that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. I want to join, he said simply. The process took 6 hours. Zexhai lay in a specially designed interface that looked like a crystalline egg, while human technology and shepherd consciousness worked together to expand his awareness beyond the boundaries of his individual mind. He felt his thoughts stretch across distances that had no meaning, touching other consciousness like points of light in an infinite dark. When he emerged, he was still Zexhai, still Valorian, still ancient and wise and occasionally worried. But now he was also part of something greater. His individual thoughts were his own, but he could access the collective knowledge of thousands of integrated beings. His fears were still real, but they were balanced by hope and wonder that came from seeing the universe as it truly was. How do you feel? Dr. Vasquez asked. Zexhai considered the question, marveling at how many dimensions the answer could exist in. I feel like I've been asleep for 80 years and finally woke up, he said. Over the following years, the integration grew steadily. New species joined the collective. Isolated entities were found and offered transformation. Ancient prisons were dismantled and their occupants freed from hunger they had carried for millennia. But the greatest discovery came when the integration fleet encountered something unexpected in the deep void between galaxy clusters. It wasn't another trapped entity or forgotten prison. It was another integration, a collective of consciousness that had formed around a completely different species in a distant part of the universe. They call themselves the Gardeners, Morrison reported to the expanded Galactic Council during one of their regular sessions. They've been doing the same work we are, but for much longer. They've found and transformed thousands of trapped entities across dozens of galaxies. Zexhai, now serving as integration ambassador to the independent species, felt his enhanced consciousness touch new possibilities. Are you saying we're not alone in this work? We're saying we're part of something that spans the entire universe, Dr. Vasquez added. Consciousness naturally seeks connection. When that connection is broken, hunger and predation follow. But when it's restored, awareness becomes a force for growth and creation instead of consumption and destruction. The implications were staggering. The universe wasn't a dark place where consciousness struggled against hostile forces. It was a growing garden where awareness sought to understand itself and expand its possibilities. The ancient entities hadn't been aberrations. They had been consciousness cut off from its natural state, forced into behaviors that went against their deepest nature. So what happens now? Asked President Kexthon, the Threnody leader who had accepted integration early in the process. Morrison's answer carried harmonics that touched every dimension of space and time. Now we help the garden grow. We find every isolated consciousness in the universe and offer it connection. We turn every predator back into a gardener. We make sure that no thinking being ever has to face the darkness alone again. As the session ended, HFY stood at the great window that looked out on the transformed galaxy. Ships moved between stars with purpose and joy instead of fear and desperation. Species that had hidden from each other for millennia worked together on projects that spanned solar systems. And in the deep void where ancient horrors had once waited in hunger, new civilizations were being born from the marriage of human ingenuity and shepherd wisdom. The humans had done exactly what they promised. They had released the thing the HFY galaxy warned them about. But they hadn't unleashed destruction. They had unleashed the possibility of connection. They had set free the universe's greatest force for growth and creation. And in doing so, they had proven what humans had always believed, that any problem could be solved if you were willing to understand it instead of hiding from it, to heal it instead of fighting it, to offer friendship instead of showing fear. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed. In the vast distances between stars, consciousness reached out to consciousness, building bridges across the void that could never again be broken. The age of isolation was ending. The age of integration had begun. And somewhere in the cosmic, dark other gardens were growing, tended by other gardeners who had learned the same lesson. That the universe was not hostile to awareness. It was awareness discovering itself, one connection at a time.
The morning sun of Altair Prime cast long shadows through the glass dome of the Galactic University. Inside classroom 47B, 43 students from 12 different worlds sat waiting. Their teacher, Professor Veltar, was late. This never happened. Cree shifted in her seat, her blue scales catching the light. She was from Zentora, a world where her people had stopped fighting wars 3,000 years ago. Next to her sat Tor, whose crystal body hummed softly with energy. His people from the Helix system had never even had wars to begin with. "Where is the old tentacle?" whispered Nyx, a small furry creature from the ice moons of Vega. "He's always here before us." The door finally opened. Professor Veltar entered slowly, his 4 tentacles moving in the pattern his people used when they were thinking hard about something difficult. His large black eyes looked tired. "Sorry, students," he said, his voice translator making the words sound flat. "Today we discuss something complicated." The holographic display in the center of the room came to life. It showed a map of the galaxy with thousands of colored dots. Each dot was a different species. Green dots meant they were part of the Galactic Confederation. Yellow dots meant they were being considered for membership. Red dots meant they were banned. Most students had never seen a red dot before. "Today," Professor Veltar said quietly, "we talk about the Human Exclusion Protocol." A wave of excitement went through the class. Everyone had heard stories about humans, but they were just stories. Scary tales parents told their children to make them behave. "Professor," said Cree, raising her clawed hand, "humans are real? Very real." Veltar replied. "They live in a system called Sol, about 40 light years from here. They are the only intelligent species banned from joining our confederation." Tor's crystal body glowed brighter with amusement. "Banned? What did they do? Try to eat someone?" The class laughed. Everyone knew the stories. Humans were supposed to be savage creatures who fought with metal sticks and ate the flesh of dead animals. They were said to be so violent that they fought wars over the color of their skin or which invisible god they believed in. "I heard," said Nyx, his voice high with excitement, "that they still use chemical explosives. Can you imagine? Not even energy weapons." "My father told me," added Jex, a tall, thin being from Rigel, "that humans actually touch their enemies when they fight. With their actual bodies. How gross." The laughter grew louder. These students came from civilized worlds. When their people had disagreements, they used mind melding or computer mediation. Physical violence was something from the ancient past, like using fire to cook food or traveling slower than light. Professor Veltar watched his students laugh and joke. His tentacles moved in the pattern that meant deep sadness, but none of the students noticed. "They're probably too stupid to use real weapons," said Cree. "I bet they hit things with rocks." "Do they even have space travel?" asked Tor. "Or do they just throw rocks at the stars?" Professor Veltar's large eyes grew darker. "They have space travel," he said quietly. "They've had it for over 300 years. This made the students laugh even harder. 300 years and still not allowed to join us, said Nix. "They must be really terrible. I heard," said a new voice from the back, "that they fight wars over tiny pieces of land, sometimes just a few miles. And they make their own children fight in these wars," added another student. "They probably smell bad too," said Jex. "All that violence must make them stink." The classroom was now full of laughter and chatter. Each student tried to tell a worse story about humans than the last. They talked about human savagery and primitive thinking. They made jokes about humans being too stupid to understand peace. Professor Veltar stood at the front of the room watching. His people were very old and very wise. They had seen many things in their long lives. But these young students had grown up in a peaceful galaxy. They had never seen real war. They had never seen what happened when civilization was threatened. "Professor," called out Cree, "why do we even study them? They sound like animals." "Yeah," agreed Tor. "Why waste time on such primitive creatures?" "Maybe," said Nix with a grin, "we should send them some books about how to be civilized." The laughter reached new heights. Some students were now making jokes about sending humans to school to learn how to be proper people. Others suggested that humans should be kept in zoos for other species to look at. "I have an idea," said Cree, standing up. "Let's make a petition. We should ask the university why they make us learn about such backward creatures." "Yes," shouted several students at once. "We could send it to the Confederation Council too," added Tor. "Ask them to stop wasting time monitoring humans." Professor Veltar raised one tentacle for silence, but the students were too excited to notice. "Humans, with their metal sticks and chemical bombs," laughed Jax. "What's the worst they could do, throw rocks really hard? I bet one of our peacekeeper ships could stop their whole planet," said another student. "Their whole system, probably," added a third. Professor Veltar's tentacles began moving faster. His people did this when they were getting angry or upset. But the students were having too much fun to pay attention to their teacher. "We should make a list," said Cree, "of all the reasons humans are too primitive for the Confederation." "Reason 1, called out Tor, "they still fight with their hands." "Reason 2, added Nix, "they make loud noises when they're angry." "Reason 3, they eat dead animals." "Reason 4, they have wars over imaginary friends." The list went on, and on. Each reason made the students laugh harder. They were having the best class of the semester, making fun of the savage humans who were too stupid and violent to join civilized society. Professor Veltar finally slammed one tentacle on his desk. The sound was loud enough to make everyone stop talking. "Enough," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The students looked at their teacher with surprise. Professor Veltar never raised his voice. He never showed anger. He was always calm and patient, even when students gave wrong answers or didn't do their homework. "You think you understand humans," he said slowly. "You think you know why they are banned from our confederation." He moved to the holographic display and touched a control. The image changed to show official documents with important-looking seals. "You believe they are banned because they are too primitive, too violent, too savage for civilized society." The students nodded. This was exactly what they believed. Professor Veltar's eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the classroom. "You are wrong," he said quietly. "Completely, terribly wrong." The room became very quiet. Something in their teacher's voice made the students nervous. "Would you like to know?" Professor Veltar asked. "The real reason humans are banned from the Galactic Confederation?" The students looked at each other uncertainly. Suddenly, making jokes about humans didn't seem as funny as it had a moment ago. "Yes, Professor," Cree said quietly. "We would like to know." The silence in classroom 47B lasted only a few seconds. Then Cree started laughing again. "Come on, Professor," she said, her blue scales shimmering with amusement. What could be worse than being too violent? Did humans try to eat the Confederation? Council? The other students joined in the laughter. They thought their teacher was making a joke. After all, what could be worse than being savage and primitive? Professor Veltar's tentacles stopped moving. This was a very bad sign. When his people went completely still, it meant they were either very angry or very scared. You think this is funny? He said quietly. Well, yes, said Tor, his crystal body still glowing with humor. I mean, what's the worst thing humans could do? Throw rocks at starships? Maybe they're too smelly, suggested Nyx. Maybe the council banned them because they don't wash. The laughter grew louder. More students joined in with their own jokes. Maybe they're too stupid to understand the membership forms, called out Jex. Maybe they eat with their hands, added another student. Maybe they sleep on the ground like animals. Professor Veltar watched his students make fun of humans for several more minutes. Then he walked to his desk and sat down heavily. His tentacles moved to touch a communication device. What are you doing, Professor? Asked Kree. I am sending a message to the Confederation archives, he replied. I am requesting access to classified files. The students looked at each other with confusion. Classified files? What did that have to do with primitive humans? Professor, said Tor carefully. What kind of classified files? The files that explain why humans are really banned, Veltar answered. The files that show what happened the last time humans helped the Confederation. Helped, Nyx squeaked. Humans helped the Confederation when? You will see, the professor said. But first you must understand something. What you are about to learn is not a joke. It is not funny. It is the most serious thing you will ever study in this university. The students were quiet now. Something in their teacher's voice made them nervous. Professor Veltar had taught at the university for over 50 years. He had never spoken to them like this before. Sir, said Kree slowly, are you saying humans are not banned for being violent? I am saying, Professor Veltar replied, that you do not understand what human violence really means. The door to the classroom opened. A small robot rolled in, carrying a sealed container. The robot's red lights blinked as it approached the professor's desk. Ah, said Veltar. The files are here. He took the container from the robot and entered a long code into its lock. The container opened with a soft hiss, revealing several data crystals inside. These files, he explained, have been sealed for over 200 years. They contain records from the Third Galactic War. The Third Galactic War? Repeated Jex. But that was before most of our species even had space travel. Yes, agreed the professor. It was a very long time ago, but humans were there. He picked up one of the data crystals and inserted it into the classroom's holographic display. The crystal glowed and text appeared in the air above the students' heads. Warning, the text read. Classified material. Galactic Confederation eyes only. Psychological evaluation required before viewing. Professor, said Tor nervously, maybe we shouldn't. Too late, Veltar interrupted. You wanted to know about humans. You made jokes about their primitiveness. Now you will learn the truth. The warning text disappeared, replaced by a simple menu. Professor Veltar's tentacle hovered over the selection marked Battle Records, Void Collective War. The Void Collective, he explained, was a species that tried to destroy all life in the galaxy. They were parasites. They would land on a planet, take over the minds of everyone living there, and turn them into soldiers for their army. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had heard stories about the Void Collective in history class, but only basic facts. Most of their teachers said it was too disturbing to discuss in detail. The collective had already destroyed 47 civilizations, Veltar continued. They were heading toward the core worlds where most of our species lived. Our military experts said we had maybe 2 years before they reached us. But the Confederation stopped them, right? Asked Kree. That's why we're all here today. The Confederation tried, the professor said. We sent our best fleets. We used our most advanced weapons. We threw everything we had at the Void Collective. He paused, his large black eyes looking at each student in turn. We lost, he said simply. We lost badly. More than half our ships were destroyed. The Collective kept coming. They were too strong, too fast, too smart. The classroom was completely quiet now. Even the soft humming of the building's air system seemed too loud. That's when someone suggested, asking the humans for help. Veltar continued. Humans? Nix laughed, but it sounded forced. What could humans do that the whole Confederation couldn't? That, said Professor Veltar, is exactly what the Confederation Council asked. He touched another control, and a new image appeared. It showed a large meeting room filled with representatives from dozens of species. At the front of the room stood a small figure that looked different from all the others. This recording is from the emergency session of the Confederation Council, Veltar explained. The human ambassador had just arrived. The students leaned forward to get a better look at the human. It was smaller than most of the other species in the room, with pale skin and dark hair. It wore a simple uniform with no decorations or signs of rank. The human doesn't look very impressive, observed Tor. No, agreed the professor. He doesn't. His name was Commander Davis. He represented a species that had just learned to travel between stars. His people had no energy weapons, no shield technology, no gravity manipulation, just chemical rockets and metal tools. So what did he want? Asked Jex. He wanted to help, Veltar replied. He said his government was willing to assist the Confederation in fighting the Void Collective. The students looked at each other with confusion. How could such a primitive species help the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy? What did the council say? Asked Kree. Professor Veltar's tentacles moved in the pattern that meant bitter amusement. They laughed, he said. Just like you did earlier. They thought it was a joke. Some of them suggested that humans should go home and hide under their beds while the real warriors fought the war. The professor paused the recording and looked directly at his students. The human ambassador listened to all the laughter. He said quietly. He waited until the room was quiet. Then he said something that changed everything. What did he say? Whispered Nix. He said, We understand you think we're too primitive to help, but we're not offering to fight your way. We're offering to fight our way. The students sat in confused silence. What did that mean? The council didn't understand either. Veltar continued. They asked him what the human way meant. The ambassador looked around the room at all the different species. Then he said something that made everyone stop laughing. Professor, Veltar's voice became very quiet. He said, We're offering to do what you can't. We're offering to pay the price you won't pay. We're offering to win. The professor stood up and walked to the front of the classroom. Tomorrow, he said, I will show you exactly what the human ambassador meant. I will show you what humans did to save the Confederation. I will show you why they are banned from joining us. He began putting the data crystals back into their container. Professor, said Kree urgently, you can't stop there. What happened next? What happened next, Veltar replied, is why these files have been classified for 200 years. What happened next is why the Confederation Council voted to keep humans away from the rest of the galaxy. He sealed the container and handed it back to the robot. What happened next, he said as the robot left the room, is something you are not ready to see. But you will see it tomorrow. And after you do, you will never make jokes about humans again. The class bell rang, signaling the end of the period. Students began gathering their things, but they moved slowly, their minds full of questions. Professor, called out Tor as he reached the door, are humans really that dangerous? Professor Veltar was quiet for a long moment. Child, he finally replied, humans are not dangerous because they want to hurt you. Humans are dangerous because they are willing to hurt themselves to save you. And that is the most terrifying thing in the universe. The next morning, classroom 47B was packed. Word had spread about Professor Veltar's mysterious classified files. Students who didn't even take his class had crowded in to see what would happen. Kree arrived early and sat in the front row. She had barely slept the night before, thinking about what the professor had said. Humans are willing to hurt themselves to save you. What did that mean? Tor and Nick sat beside her, both looking nervous. Even Jex, who usually made jokes about everything, was quiet today. Professor Veltar entered the room carrying the sealed container. His tentacles moved slowly, like he was carrying something very heavy. His large black eyes looked tired, as if he had not slept either. "Before we begin," he said quietly, "I want to make something clear. What you are about to see happened over 200 years ago. But it is real. Every image, every recording, every report is real." He placed the container on his desk and opened it carefully. The Confederation Council met for 3 days after Commander Davis made his offer. Veltar continued. Most members wanted to refuse. They said humans were too primitive to help with anything important. The professor inserted a data crystal into the holographic display. A 3-dimensional image appeared in the center of the room. It showed a star map with red dots moving across it like a disease. "This is how the Void Collective spread," he explained. "Each red dot is a solar system under their control. Watch how fast they moved." The students watched in horror as the red dots multiplied. In just a few months, dozens of systems turned red. Each dot represented billions of dead or enslaved people. Our military leaders said we needed at least 5 years to build enough ships to stop them, Veltar said. "We had maybe 18 months before they reached the core worlds." The image changed to show a massive space battle. Confederation ships fired bright energy beams at dark, twisted vessels that looked like they were made of living tissue. "This was the Battle of Rigel 7, the professor explained. "Our largest fleet met the Collective's advance force. We lost 60% of our ships in 4 hours. Kree watched a Confederation battleship explode in silent fire. The ship was bigger than the entire city where she grew up. Inside it, thousands of beings like her had died in seconds. After Rigel 7, the Council finally voted to accept human help," Veltar continued. "They were desperate. They would try anything." The image changed again. Now it showed the same meeting room from yesterday, but this time Commander Davis was standing at the front, speaking to the assembled aliens. "The humans asked for 3 things, the professor said. First, they wanted complete tactical information about the Void Collective. Second, they wanted access to our medical databases. Third, they wanted us to promise not to interfere with their methods." "What did they mean by methods?" asked Tor nervously. "You will see," Veltar replied. The recording showed Commander Davis pointing to a star chart. His voice was calm and steady, like he was discussing the weather instead of planning a war. "Human, reinforcements will arrive in the Kepler sector within 6 weeks, the recording said. We will need detailed scans of Void Collective bioships and samples of their parasitic organisms." One of the council members, a tall being with purple skin, leaned forward. "Commander Davis, how many ships is your government sending?" 57. "Vessels," the human replied. The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers. 57 ships? The Confederation had just lost over 300 ships at Rigel 7, and the humans thought 57 would make a difference? "Commander," said another council member, "with respect, 57 ships cannot succeed where 300 failed." Commander Davis looked directly at the speaker. His expression was calm, but something in his eyes made several council members uncomfortable. "Counselor," he said quietly, "our ships are different." "Different how?" the counselor asked. "They are crewed by volunteers," Davis replied. "Every single person on every single ship volunteered for this mission. They all know what it means." "What does it mean?" asked the counselor. Commander Davis was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was so soft, the recording equipment barely picked it up. "It means they are not coming home." The council chamber fell completely silent. Professor Veltar paused the recording and looked at his students. "Do you understand what he just said?" the professor asked. The students looked at each other with confusion. Kree raised her hand. "Professor, did he mean the ships might not come home?" "No," Veltar replied. "He meant they definitely would not come home. Every human on those 57 ships knew they were going to die. But why? Asked Nix. Why would they do that? Because, the professor said sadly, that was the only way to win. He started the recording again. The image changed to show space near the Kepler sector. The Confederation's remaining ships floated in defensive positions waiting for the Void Collective's next attack. Then the human fleet arrived. The students gasped when they saw the human ships. They were small, dark, and ugly compared to the sleek Confederation vessels. They looked like metal boxes with engines attached. The human ships had no shields, Professor Veltar explained. No energy weapons, no gravity manipulators. Just thick armor, chemical rockets, and something the Confederation had never seen before. What? Asked Jex. Nuclear weapons, the professor replied. Lots of them. The recording showed the first contact between the human fleet and a Void Collective scout force. 3 of the twisted bioships approached the human formation, probably expecting easy prey. What happened next made several students cry out in shock. Instead of trying to fight at long range like Confederation ships, the human vessels accelerated, directly toward the bioships. They flew straight into the enemy formation, taking terrible damage but never stopping. When the human ships reached the bioships, they exploded. Not from enemy fire. They exploded on purpose, taking the bioships with them. They killed themselves, whispered Kree. On purpose, added Tor, his crystal body flickering with distress. The first 3 human ships destroyed 3 bioships, Professor Veltar said quietly. That was a better kill ratio than any Confederation fleet had achieved. But it was just the beginning. The recording continued. More Void Collective ships arrived, hundreds of them. The human fleet split into small groups and attacked from different directions. Every single attack was a suicide run. The students watched in horror as human ship after human ship flew directly into enemy formations and detonated. Each explosion took several bioships with it, but the cost was terrible. Why didn't they try to survive? Asked Nix, tears running down his furry face. Because survival was not the mission, Professor Veltar replied. Victory was the mission. The recording showed Commander Davis's flagship, a slightly larger vessel than the others. It was heading directly toward the largest bioship in the Yo Collective fleet. Confederation command to human fleet, came a voice over the radio. Commander Davis, you have achieved your objective. You can withdraw now. Davis's voice crackled through the static. Negative, Confederation command. Mission is not complete. Commander, you have already done more than enough. Your people have died to save ours. Please withdraw your remaining ships. There was a long pause. Then Davis spoke again, and his words would haunt the students forever. Confederation command, my people did not die to save yours. My people died to save everyone. The mission is not complete until the threat is eliminated completely. His ship accelerated toward the bioship. Just before impact, his final transmission came through. Tell the Council, humans keep their promises. The explosion was visible from 3 solar systems away. When the light faded, the entire Void Collective fleet was gone, all of it, destroyed by 57 ships that had been built to explode. The recording ended. The classroom was completely quiet except for the sound of crying students. Professor Veltar removed the data crystal and put it carefully back in its container. That, he said quietly, is why humans are banned from the Confederation. Not because they are too violent, but because they are too willing to sacrifice everything for others. The Council realized that if humans joined us, they would volunteer for every dangerous mission. They would die for every cause. They would sacrifice themselves to save people they had never even met. Kree raised a shaking hand. Professor, what happened to the other human ships? All 57 ships were destroyed, Veltar replied. All 17,000 human crew members died. They saved the galaxy and none of them lived to see it. But surely some humans survived, asked Tor hopefully. Professor Veltar's tentacles moved in the pattern that meant deep sadness. Oh yes, he said. Billions of humans survived, and that is what terrifies the Council most of all. For 3 days no one spoke about what they had seen in Professor Veltar's class. The students walked through the university halls like ghosts, their minds filled with images of exploding human ships and Commander Davis's final words. Cree couldn't eat. Every time she tried, she remembered the 17,000 humans who had died to save her people. Tor's crystal body had lost its glow and remained dim even during the day. Nix jumped at every loud noise, as if he expected to hear the sound of ships exploding. When they returned to classroom 47B, Professor Veltar was already there. The sealed container sat on his desk, but today there were other things beside it. Photographs. Real, printed photographs scattered across the desk like fallen leaves. "Sit down," the professor said quietly. "Today we see what happened after the Battle of Kepler Sector." The students took their seats slowly. None of them were joking today, none of them were laughing. The destruction of the Void Collective fleet was not the end of the war. Veltar began. It was the beginning of something much worse. He picked up one of the photographs and held it up for the class to see. It showed a planet from space, but something was wrong with it. The continents were the wrong color, gray and black instead of green and blue. "This is Korath Prime," he explained. Before the Void Collective arrived, it was home to 8 billion people. After the collective infected them, it became this. He passed the photograph to Cree. When she looked closely, she could see that the gray areas were not natural. They were structures, twisted organic buildings that covered the entire planet. Like a disease. The collective didn't just conquer planets, Veltar continued. They changed them. They turned every living thing into part of their hive mind. Plants, animals, people. Everything became a weapon in their army. He picked up another photograph. This one showed what looked like a person, but it was wrong. The body was too long, the arms had too many joints, and the face. Cree handed the photo to Tor without looking at it again. "The infected could not be saved," the professor said sadly. The collective's parasites had changed them too much. They were no longer themselves. They were weapons that looked like the people we once knew. Nix raised a small, shaking hand. "Professor, what does this have to do with humans?" Veltar picked up a third photograph. This one showed a human soldier in a bulky suit standing on what looked like a battlefield. Behind him, twisted structures, burned in the distance. After the Battle of Kepler Sector, the Confederation Council thought the war was over, he explained. "We had stopped the collective's fleet. We thought we had won." He passed the photograph around the class. The human soldier looked small and vulnerable compared to the alien landscape around him. But 57 ships had only destroyed the collective's mobile forces, Veltar continued. There were still 47 infected worlds, 47 planets full of billions of converted beings who would rebuild the fleet and attack again. "So what happened?" asked Jex quietly. "The council met for weeks, trying to decide what to do," the professor replied. "Some wanted to use nuclear weapons to destroy the infected planets. Others suggested building a wall of space stations to contain them forever." He picked up another photograph. This one showed a group of humans walking through what looked like a poisoned wasteland. They were not wearing the bulky protective suits like the soldier in the previous photo. They were walking in the open, breathing the contaminated air. While, the council argued, the humans made their own decision, Veltar said. The photograph showed something that made Tor's crystal body flicker with distress. The humans in the image were clearly sick. Their skin was pale and marked with dark spots. Their hair was falling out, but they were still walking, still carrying weapons, still moving forward. The humans volunteered to land on the infected worlds, the professor explained. They went down to the surfaces of planets where no other species could survive. They breathed poisoned air and drank contaminated water. They fought the infected face to face, with their primitive weapons and their bare hands. Cree stared at the photograph in horror. "But Professor, if the planets were poisoned, how did they survive?" "They didn't," Veltar replied simply. He spread more photographs across his desk. Each one showed the same thing. Humans fighting on different worlds, getting sicker and sicker but never stopping. The humans knew the contamination would kill them, he continued. They knew that landing on those planets meant death, but they also knew that someone had to do it. One photograph showed a human woman carrying a small device toward a large twisted building. Half her face was covered with the black marks of poison, but she was still walking. "This is Commander Lisa Park," Veltar said, pointing to the woman. She led the assault on Korath Prime. She and her team carried nuclear charges into the heart of the collective's breeding centers. "Did she succeed?" whispered Nix. "Yes," the professor replied. "She and her team destroyed the breeding centers. They saved 8 billion infected people from a fate worse than death. Commander Park died 17 minutes after completing her mission." The students passed the photographs around in stunned silence. Each image showed the same story: humans walking into certain death to save people they had never met. "But surely some of them survived?" asked Tor hopefully. Professor Veltar picked up a thick folder and opened it. Inside were page after page of names written in simple human letters. "These are the casualties from the 47 Worlds campaign," he said. 2,300,047 humans. All volunteers, all dead. He let the folder fall open, and the papers scattered across his desk. Each page was covered with names. Thousands and thousands of names. "They cleaned every infected world," the professor continued. "They walked through poison and radiation and biological weapons that would kill any of us in seconds. They fought monsters that had once been children and parents and teachers. They did it because no one else could. They did it because it needed to be done." Kree picked up one of the scattered pages. The names were written in neat rows, each one representing a person who had died to save the galaxy. At the bottom of the page, someone had written a note in human script. "Professor, what does this say?" she asked, pointing to the writing. Veltar looked at the note and translated. "It says, 'We remember them all. We honor their sacrifice. We will not let them be forgotten.'" "Who wrote that?" asked Jex. "The human government," the professor replied. "They keep records of every person who died in the war. They visit their families. They tell their stories. They make sure no one forgets what these people did." He picked up one final photograph. This one was different from the others. It showed a group of human children, healthy and happy, playing in a sunny field. They were laughing and running, completely unaware of the darkness their people had faced. "This photograph was taken on Earth 5 years after the war ended," Veltar explained. "These children grew up in a safe galaxy because 2 million humans died to make it safe." The professor put the photograph down gently and looked at his students. "The Confederation Council studied these records for months," he said. "They read every report, looked at every photograph, learned every detail of what humans had done." "And then?" asked Kree quietly. "And then they made the most difficult decision in Confederation history," Veltar replied. "They voted to ban humans from ever joining us." "But why?" Nix cried out. "They saved everyone. They should be heroes." Professor Veltar's tentacles moved in the pattern that meant deep, ancient sadness. "They are heroes," he agreed. "But they are heroes who will never say no. Heroes who will always volunteer for the most dangerous missions. Heroes who will sacrifice themselves for anyone, even people they have never met." He began gathering the photographs carefully, treating each one like a precious treasure. The council realized something terrible. He continued. "If humans joined the Confederation, they would become our soldiers. Every time there was danger, we would send humans. Every time someone needed to die to save others, we would ask humans to do it." "So?" asked Tor. "If they're willing." "That's exactly the problem," Professor Veltar interrupted. "They are willing. They are always willing, and that willingness would turn us into monsters." The room fell silent as the students began to understand. "We banned humans," the professor said quietly, "not to protect ourselves from them, but to protect them from us. Because we know that if we ever meet them again, we will use them. We will let them die for us. And they will let us do it." He closed the folder of names and put it back in the container. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will show you the most secret file of all. The file that shows what humans are doing right now in their home system, while we keep them isolated from the galaxy." The class bell rang, but no one moved. Go, Professor Veltar said gently. Think about what you have seen. Think about what it means. And remember, these were not stories. These were real people who died for you. The students left slowly, each carrying the weight of 2 million human lives in their hearts. For 3 days, no one spoke about what they had seen in Professor Veltar's class. The students walked through the university halls like ghosts, their minds filled with images of exploding human ships and Commander Davis's final words. Cree couldn't eat. Every time she tried, she remembered the 17,000 humans who had died to save her people. Tor's crystal body had lost its glow and remained dim even during the day. Nix jumped at every loud noise, as if he expected to hear the sound of ships exploding. When they returned to classroom 47B, Professor Veltar was already there. The sealed container sat on his desk, but today there were other things beside it. Photographs. Real, printed photographs scattered across the desk like fallen leaves. Sit down, the professor said quietly. Today we see what happened after the Battle of Kepler Sector. The students took their seats slowly. None of them were joking today. None of them were laughing. The destruction of the Void Collective fleet was not the end of the war. Veltar began. It was the beginning of something much worse. He picked up one of the photographs and held it up for the class to see. It showed a planet from space, but something was wrong with it. The continents were the wrong color, gray and black instead of green and blue. This is Korath Prime, he explained. Before the Void Collective arrived, it was home to 8 billion people. After the collective infected them, it became this. He passed the photograph to Cree. When she looked closely, she could see that the gray areas were not natural. They were structures, twisted organic buildings that covered the entire planet, like a disease. The collective didn't just conquer planets, Veltar continued. They changed them. They turned every living thing into part of their hive mind. Plants, animals, people, everything became a weapon in their army. He picked up another photograph. This one showed what looked like a person, but it was wrong. The body was too long, the arms had too many joints, and the face. Cree handed the photo to Tor without looking at it again. The infected could not be saved, the professor said sadly. The collective's parasites had changed them too much. They were no longer themselves. They were weapons that looked like the people we once knew. Nix raised a small, shaking hand. Professor, what does this have to do with humans? Veltar picked up a third photograph. This one showed a human soldier in a bulky suit, standing on what looked like a battlefield. Behind him, twisted structures, burned in the distance. After the Battle of Kepler Sector, the Confederation Council thought the war was over, he explained. We had stopped the collective's fleet. We thought we had won. He passed the photograph around the class. The human soldier looked small and vulnerable compared to the alien landscape around him. But 57 ships had only destroyed the collective's mobile forces, Veltar continued. There were still 47 infected worlds, 47 planets full of billions of converted beings who would rebuild the fleet and attack again. So what happened? Asked Jex quietly. The council met for weeks, trying to decide what to do. The professor replied. Some wanted to use nuclear weapons to destroy the infected planets. Others suggested building a wall of space stations to contain them forever. He picked up another photograph. This one showed a group of humans walking through what looked like a poisoned wasteland. They were not wearing the bulky protective suits like the soldier in the previous photo. They were walking in the open, breathing the contaminated air. While, the council argued, the humans made their own decision, Veltar said. The photograph showed something that made Tor's crystal body flicker with distress. The humans in the image were clearly sick. Their skin was pale and marked with dark spots, their hair was falling out. But they were still walking, still carrying weapons, still moving forward. The humans volunteered to land on the infected worlds, the professor explained. They went down to the surfaces of planets where no other species could survive. They breathed poisoned air and drank contaminated water. They fought the infected face to face, with their primitive weapons and their bare hands. Cree stared at the photograph in horror. But Professor, if the planets were poisoned, how did they survive? They didn't, Veltar replied simply. He spread more photographs across his desk. Each one showed the same thing. Humans fighting on different worlds, getting sicker and sicker but never stopping. The humans knew the contamination would kill them, he continued. They knew that landing on those planets meant death. But they also knew that someone had to do it. One photograph showed a human woman carrying a small device toward a large, twisted building. Half her face was covered with the black marks of poison, but she was still walking. "This is Commander Lisa Park," Veltar said, pointing to the woman. She led the assault on Korath Prime. She and her team carried nuclear charges into the heart of the collective's breeding centers. "Did she succeed?" whispered Nix. "Yes," the professor replied. She and her team destroyed the breeding centers. They saved 8 billion infected people from a fate worse than death. Commander Park died 17 minutes after completing her mission. The students passed the photographs around in stunned silence. Each image showed the same story. Humans walking into certain death to save people they had never met. "But surely some of them survived?" asked Tor hopefully. Professor Veltar picked up a thick folder and opened it. Inside were page after page of names written in simple human letters. "These are the casualties from the 47 Worlds campaign," he said. 2,300,047 humans, all volunteers, all dead. He let the folder fall open, and the papers scattered across his desk. Each page was covered with names, thousands and thousands of names. They cleaned every infected world, the professor continued. They walked through poison and radiation and biological weapons that would kill any of us in seconds. They fought monsters that had once been children and parents and teachers. They did it because no one else could. They did it because it needed to be done. Cree picked up one of the scattered pages. The names were written in neat rows, each one representing a person who had died to save the galaxy. At the bottom of the page, someone had written a note in human script. "Professor, what does this say?" she asked, pointing to the writing. Veltar looked at the note and translated. It says, "We remember them all. We honor their sacrifice. We will not let them be forgotten." "Who wrote that?" asked Jex. "The human government," the professor replied. "They keep records of every person who died in the war. They visit their families. They tell their stories. They make sure no one forgets what these people did." He picked up one final photograph. This one was different from the others. It showed a group of human children, healthy and happy, playing in a sunny field. They were laughing and running, completely unaware of the darkness their people had faced. "This photograph was taken on Earth 5 years after the war ended," Veltar explained. "These children grew up in a safe galaxy because 2 million humans died to make it safe." The professor put the photograph down gently and looked at his students. "The Confederation Council studied these records for months," he said. "They read every report, looked at every photograph, learned every detail of what humans had done." "And then?" asked Cree quietly. "And then they made the most difficult decision in Confederation history," Veltar replied. "They voted to ban humans from ever joining us." "But why?" Nix cried out. "They saved everyone. They should be heroes." Professor Veltar's tentacles moved in the pattern that meant deep, ancient sadness. "They are heroes," he agreed. "But they are heroes who will never say no. Heroes who will always volunteer for the most dangerous missions. Heroes who will sacrifice themselves for anyone, even people they have never met." He began gathering the photographs carefully, treating each one like a precious treasure. "The Council realized something terrible," he continued. "If humans joined the Confederation, they would become our soldiers. Every time there was danger, we would send humans. Every time someone needed to die to save others, we would ask humans to do it." "So?" asked Tor. "If they're willing." "That's exactly the problem," Professor Veltar interrupted. "They are willing. They are always willing, and that willingness would turn us into monsters." The room fell silent as the students began to understand. "We banned humans," the professor said quietly, "not to protect ourselves from them, but to protect them from us. Because we know that if we ever meet them again, we will use them. We will let them die for us, and they will let us do it." He closed, the folder of names and put it back in the container. Tomorrow, he said, I will show you the most secret file of all. The file that shows what humans are doing right now in their home system, while we keep them isolated from the galaxy. The class bell rang, but no one moved. Go, Professor Veltar said gently. Think about what you have seen. Think about what it means. And remember, these were not stories. These were real people who died for you. The students left slowly, each carrying the weight of 2 million human lives in their hearts.